What are we going to do as a church? Our souls need to wake up. We need to respond to the gospel of Jesus. He said, go into the world.
We don't want to deal with reality, Christian. We don't even want to deal with reality, even though we've been saved from this place.
I'm calling on you today in the name of Jesus to rise up to the call of God. Christ is coming back soon.
If I start telling people about hell, I might just scare them off. Where are you going to scare them off to? Hell number 2? People stop and think about it. If hell really exists, and it does, I didn't say that Jesus did, then don't you think people need to know about it? Can't you at least give them a fighting chance? Or are you just going to sit there and let them burn?
This is Chris from Don't Let Them Burn. Welcome to our program. This is Don't Let Them Burn presents Paranormal Shift, Episode 3. You can contact us at don'tletthemburn.com, and that's the main hub. We're on different social media networks. You can find the links below. Another way to support us is to give this video a like and share. And if you don't mind, also subscribe. Tonight, we're going to be talking about strange subjects like UFOs, alien invasions, and basically the topics that are now more mainstream than ever. 20 years ago, it was basically strange to even talk about these topics. And now, even more than ever, we see UFO disclosures. Tonight's guest is Ali Siadatan from Think Again Productions. Ali is also the producer of the documentary film UFOs Angels and Gods. Ali and I met on Facebook, and I also heard a couple of his interviews on other programs. I want to apologize for some of the audio quality of this interview. I had to re-record this intro for extreme clarity. So, without further ado, here's the interview. I hope you enjoy it.
Ali, how you doing?
Fine, thank you, Chris. Very happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
Oh, it's really great to have you. So where would you like to start?
I had a UFO sighting, a close-up UFO sighting in the deserts of Iran, and that really propelled my research forward in the 1990s when I was exposed to the possible connection between the whole concept of UFOs and the chariots that were mentioned in the Bible. This intrigued me, and I was looking into the world of angels, into these connections, and then I went to Iran to visit my dad, who has passed away since, but this was, I guess, the Christmas of 1999, and just before the year 2000. And we were taking a trip just driving on the highway in the middle of the desert. It was late at night, and it was me, him, and his wife, and we had a very close-up UFO sighting, and that kind of really shocked me. I was already looking into this stuff, but to actually see one is a very powerful experience. It's shocking, and so that's what really got me deep into the research. Now, I really had to look into it. So we were driving, and I was sitting with my back to the passenger door in the front seat, talking to both of them. My dad's wife was driving, and my dad was sitting in the middle of the back seat, hunched over with his arms on both seats, engaged in this conversation we're having, the three of us. And suddenly my dad's wife pointed out the window behind me, and she started to make these sounds like blah, 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 like that.
Yeah.
And I was so engaged in what I was telling them that I didn't really pay attention. I didn't notice it. My dad then looked at her and said, "What's wrong, Nima?" And she just kept doing that. So then he turned around to look out the window behind my head, and then he started doing the same thing. Now they were both pointing out the window and just making these sounds like blah, 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 blah. And I thought, what's wrong with you guys? So I sat properly in my seat, and I looked out the window, and a few hundred feet ahead of us, there was this large round object. It had several what I would call floors, because I could see divisions. I could see actually structure, like bolts and nuts type of structure. And I could see that it was glowing green, like pulsating with a green glow, but I could see lots of green lights on it. That's how close we were, that I could see. That's where, the pulse was coming from. And it was slowly coming down, like an angle of descent type of thing. If you're in a plane coming to land, there's an angle of descent that you have to have coming down to the tarmac. It was that kind of a thing. It was slowly coming down, and we were driving at full speed on the highway. And it was kind of, there was no cars around, there was no cities around. We were driving, past midnight, and eventually this thing was perpendicular to our car. So as we were going forward and this thing was coming down, now I could look right out my window, and it was perpendicular to us. And what I thought I saw was this large round black tube come out of the earth, out of the ground. And it was the same color as the desert night. If we were in this close, you wouldn't have seen the tube. And this thing just went on top of it, and then it went into the earth, just like that, and disappeared.
Oh.
So it was coming into the ground. It wasn't actually flying around, or it was coming into the ground and went into the earth. And then, my dad's wife, I was talking to them about scripture, and this was very new to them. I mean, just the whole concept of the gospel and things like that, and prophecies and biblical history. That entire trip had been kind of about that. And so my dad's wife, she just said, this was a sign from God to show us that all that Ali is telling us is true. And then she's like, did you see that? And he's like, I did. And then I just kind of sank in my seat in a state of shock. Here I was talking about, the Bible and the world of angels and prophecy and God and the supernatural and all of that. And yet I was shocked. I was like, what just happened? and it's kind of, outside of the realm. I mean, this was then, fast forward today, and I became a researcher, made this documentary, went viral. And so I'm very I'm very knowledgeable now when it comes to UFO research. So one thing that I found out was that people don't know what to do with it. It's outside of the kind of stuff that we talk about in our everyday. So people actually don't know where to put it. They don't know how to classify this in their brain. And so you think you're going to suddenly have this big conversation about this thing, and then actually you don't. It's more like a hot potato. You're like, I don't know what to do with this. You just kind of classify it somewhere in your brain. You explain it briefly, and you're kind of shocked, but you don't really know what to do because the implications of it are so huge. And so we got to the city we were going. We had dinner. We checked into a hotel. And then when I came back to Canada, eventually my research led me to making this documentary. And I was talking to my dad over the phone, and he asked me what I was up to. And I said, well, I'm making this documentary on UFOs. And he didn't say anything. And I said to him, do you remember? And then he suddenly burst out saying, yeah, that green thing on the road to Isfahan. I said, yes, that. And so that was actually the first time I realized that he too had seen a green thing. And it was kind of a confirmation, of me. So, and I was like, yeah, that thing. And just the way he burst out, it showed how it was pent up somewhere in his mind. He didn't know what to do with it. So when I just poked on it, it just exploded out of him. And so that's the kind of experience that people talk about. That They use everyday language. Like they'll say it looked like a hamburger or a hot dog or a ping pong table. Or, for instance, this Holocaust survivor interviewed who had a UFO sighting, she said that it was like Mentos, changing colors, like the different colors of the Mentos. And actually, she's featured in the documentary. And so that the people use language from their everyday life to talk about it because we don't have a language for it. We don't know what to do with it.
Right.
It's a shock. It's outside of our paradigm, the way we have divided up reality, the way we all as a culture function in reality. It doesn't include, UFOs, because are they aliens? Are we being, what is this? What's going on here? And it challenges your understanding of life to the point where you can't cope with it. So you just don't talk about it. You actually kind of bury it. I went down to a UFO show at the University of Toronto here, where the Minister of Defense was coming out for the first time publicly to talk about what he knew. And I went to film him, and as we were waiting to get in, we thought, hey, why don't we just start talking to people that are in line waiting to get in? And so, we put the camera up on the first person. We said, hey, hi, we're making a documentary on UFOs. We're just wondering, why are you here? And the guy was like, who's going to watch this? We're like, well, we don't know yet. We haven't made it. He's like, well, I don't want any of my colleagues to know that I'm here because I work in a bank. And so that was kind of the common thing from a lot of people in the crowd. So it's something that people actually Google at home. It's one of the most Googled things. It's something that is on the minds and hearts of lots of people. I mean, UFO groups in China have millions of members, but it's not something that we talk about in the common culture because it's embarrassing, it's weird, it's strange, we don't know what to do with it. So I think it's a very important topic. So
before you go, I need to ask you two things. I'm not sure if you mentioned, but what year was this that you had this contact with your parents?
Oh, this UFO sighting was in the Christmas holiday of 1999. I went down. I was off for Christmas, and so I went down there to see them in the winter of 1999.
Okay, and so there's a thing out there where a train of thought that says, and it's mostly true, that most people that see UFOs have dabbled into the occult in one way or the other. Is this anywhere in the realm of possibility that will happen to you, or is this something just totally foreign to that concept?
I think I don't agree with that. I don't agree with that because when you look into the people, let's say going back to Project Blue Book from 1948 to 1968, that whole period of the documentation that was gathered from citizens all over America. These were regular people. There were pilots, watchtower operators. Later we have astronauts, regular people of all kinds. People that I know and have interviewed that have nothing to do with the occult. So I think that's kind of so I don't agree. That's not what the research kind of shows. Like one of my good friends, Pastor Casper McLeod, who's written several books on UFOs from a Christian perspective, and he's had a UFO sighting in England. He's actually taken pictures of it. So it's not. I think there's different reasons. For me, when I look back at the way my life unfolded and how my research, essentially gave me a career to reach out and explain things biblically to people, I think God placed this on my path because he was like saying, Ali, you're going to be talking about this on my behalf. And this was kind of why he allowed me to see this. So I think there's many, many reasons why these things happen to people see these things. I think that's kind of kind of a narrow perspective. I think that people who get abducted, well, no, even people who get abducted, not necessarily into the occult. It's more like the bloodline that they belong to, that I think has Nephilim genes going back into the ancient world.
Okay, so now that you've opened up a can of worms with the Nephilim, tell us your perspective. I believe in the Nephilim. I believe what Genesis 6 says about the Benai Elohim. So I'm not anywhere disconnected from that thought. So you can just go ahead.
Well, for us, it was basically the research for us began between 1995 and 1997. That was kind of, I was attending a series of Bible studies, and it was during those studies that our mind turned towards this whole connection between, UFOs and the concept of angels in the Bible. And so now that we suddenly were looking at all the passages that talked about angels, and that's when the Lord, I think, led us to the Genesis 6 passage, and now we were taking it very literally, and we're like, wow, there's a connection here between angels and humans that created these giants that caused the flood. And then we looked that they were also mentioned in the book of Job, and that they were here at the creation of the earth itself. God says to Job that when he created the earth, the sons of God cried out for joy. And also we see in the first and second chapter of the book of Job that the sons of God come to the presence of God and Satan is amongst them. So there's a connection made there. So suddenly all these passages that talk about the sons of God, and then there was also their offspring, and it said that happened then and afterwards. And we noticed that there are all these tribes mentioned in the book of Deuteronomy, that they existed in the Holy Land, in the land that God had put aside for His purposes. As the Hebrew people came to that land, and they sent out spies that wow, there are all these giants. So suddenly, our mind was opening up, and this was in the middle of the 1990s, and really, frankly, there wasn't a lot of people in the Christian world about these things. So, and this was before the internet, so I was using libraries. I was a graduate student at the University of Toronto, and I had access to one of the best libraries of the country. Eventually, there was a search engine. I was called Yahoo, and it kind of was the main search engine that most people used for common day, everyday searches. I mean, there was other search engines like Alta Vista and other search engines that specialized in, let's say, academic research, scientific research, medical research. But Yahoo was kind of the search engine that we all used for basic searches. And, I put the word Nephilim in Yahoo, and it said 0 search results found. So it was okay, well, that's not going to really help me. And so we were looking at all of this, and then I came across, I went to a Christian book show, and I came across this Christian teacher. His name was Chuck Missler, and he had a tape called Nephilim. And I was like, oh, someone else is actually talking about this? So then I listened to that tape, and he talked about the sons of God as well, and he explained how is it that, starting in the 5th century, the perspective had been changed, and another, interpretation of these passages had been popularized in church thinking. Now, I discovered later on that actually going back to the rabbis in the Talmud, in the commentaries on the 5 books of Moses, that the rabbis refer to this idea that these were not actually angels but humans. This idea was already introduced by the rabbis long before the Christian era. But regardless, they also, in the Talmud, it also says that they could have been angels, because the Book of Commentaries has different commentaries on the same passage. So some rabbis took this opinion, other rabbis took another. But because of the idea of the reality of the UFO phenomenon, at this point I hadn't seen one, but I was reading about it, and the idea that giants are mentioned, that they're clearly different. These things, we were confident in this perspective that the sons of God were in fact, angelic beings, and that they had introduced their bloodline. And so as I was kind of looking into all of this, one day, this was in 1997, I came to the Bible study, and my teacher, he said, I know where Satan's throne is. And I said to him, really, where is Satan's throne? And he said, well, it's in the city of Pergamum. It says that in the Book of Revelation. So we opened up the Book of Revelation in chapter 2, and it said, yeah, there it is. It is thrown in the city of Pergamum. So I went to the Library of the University of Toronto. I started looking up Pergamum, and it eventually led me to the Library of Archaeology, basically. And there I found the notes of Carl Human, who was the archaeologist who had dug up the altar of Zeus. And he said in his notes that if there was anything of spiritual importance that Christ was referring to in the city of Pergamum, it would have been the altar of Zeus. And so I photocopied that page, brought it back to him, and I said, look, the archaeologist agrees with you. There may be a connection between Zeus and Satan. And then we thought, well, why would the Lord make a connection between Zeus and Satan? Why would that connection exist? And so as we were thinking about it, the idea came to us, well, what if actually it's that he's making a connection between the gods of the ancient world and the fallen angels? What if that is the connection that is being established? Zeus and Satan, yes, there was a connection there. Zeus was the head of the pantheon, but what if there's a broader, context here? So I thought, okay, well, let me look into that. So I went ahead and started to see what I could find, and I had a program called eSword that allowed me to isolate any word I wanted in the Bible. And it would spit out, all the passages throughout the Old and New Testament where a particular word was mentioned. So I went in and I put in gods. That's one of the words that you hear in the Bible: the gods of the nations, the gods of the Egyptians. And I put that in there, and it found out all the passages they were in, and I printed it, and it's like a little book. I mean, there's hundreds of passages. And I sat down and I started to go through every single passage. And when you kind of read something at once throughout all of Scripture, the meaning just comes off the pages of the book, right? Because you're now reading about the same topic over and over again in so many passages.
Right.
And I realized, wow, it was very clear that God was referring to these beings that were behind the nations as though they were real. He was talking about them, admonishing them, judging them, telling them that they should worship him. And it was very clear that, and even he was called the God of gods, like in Deuteronomy 10:17.
Yeah.
And I thought, wait a second, God can't be the God of mythological beings. So suddenly, this whole thing, opened up for us that, wait a second, these guys didn't just, inject humanity with their seeds, with their gene, with whatever. The word sperma is used in the Greek. So they didn't just inject humanity with this, but they also actually ruled the nations. And so passages such as Daniel chapter 10, where it talks about the prince of Persia and the prince of Greece suddenly came to life. When Satan says to the Lord that all the kingdoms of the earth are under his dominion, that came to life. Now we knew what polytheistic. And then as I was listening to one of Chuck Missler's tapes, he said, "Oh, there's a passage in Deuteronomy chapter 32, the Song of Moses, where the sons of God are mentioned, but not in the translation that most Bibles have. You have to look it up in the Septuagint, which is the Greek translation of the Old Testament, which was quoted by the Lord and by Paul and circulated often among the early church, attached to the letters of Paul." And so I looked that up, and yes, it said, that when God divided the nations, he divided them according to the number of the sons of God in Deuteronomy chapter 32, verse 8 and 9. And that was, wait a second, it says right here that God chose Jacob for himself and gave the nations into the hands of the sons of God. And that became kind of a cornerstone passage. Now I understood Daniel chapter 10. We understood, the conversation between the Lord and Satan. We understood all of the judgments and things that were spoken against these gods all through the Old Testament. Even in the New Testament, Paul, for instance, says in 1 Corinthians chapter 10, I believe it's verse 20, that the Gentiles, the Greeks, they don't worship, they worship devils, and they sacrifice to devils. And so he equates the gods of the Greeks with devils. He's actually quoting the Torah. He's actually quoting the book of Deuteronomy to the Corinthians. He's teaching them about who is it that has this lordship over them, that they are now being called out of into fellowship, with the living God through the teachings of missionaries like Paul himself. And so suddenly Chuck didn't do anything with his understanding of the use of the word sons of God in Deuteronomy chapter 32. He just mentioned it, that, hey, look, that's another passage where these characters are mentioned, but he didn't do anything with it. For us, because the Lord had opened our minds between the relationship between the gods and the fallen angels, suddenly that passage became a key passage that tied into a multitude of passages, and it kind of resurrected. So suddenly we could now see that there were three main ideas that connected the sons of God to the world. One was they had passed down the scepter of rule. They had dominion over the nations, and they chose kings. Two, they had feeded their line, their bloodline into the human world. And three, they had given alternative worldviews. They had created religions. They had given information and knowledge to the nations over which they ruled, the way that God had given his scrolls of knowledge and commandment to Israel. And now we knew that these were the three influences, And so I started to read one of Chuck's books. I got interested in his writings. It was called Alien Encounters. And as I was reading that book, it was at this point I agreed with what he said. It was just not new, but it was interesting to see that someone else was having these ideas. But one line in his book, he said that there may be a relationship between the modern day abduction phenomenon and the ancient Nephilim, and somehow I think it was God's will. That line from his book stuck to my heart, like it just stuck to my body. Suddenly I put the book down and I thought, I got to look into the modern day abduction phenomenon. So I started to look into that, and I discovered that one of the most important writers and researchers was a man by the name of Dr. David Jacobs from Temple University in Philadelphia. And as I started to I read his book, The Threat, and it documented the creation of modern day hybrids. It was very detailed, very real, very well written, and you knew as you're reading it that this is very good research. It's not. He doesn't have an agenda. He's not a New Age guy. He even doesn't have a biblical point of view. He doesn't have any point of view. He's really documenting kind of what he's seeing. And so another piece of the puzzle fell into place, that this phenomenon was going to have an end times revival, so to speak, that it again in our generation. So when the Lord said, I guess Chuck opened my mind to this, that the days of Noah, it would be like the days of Noah in Matthew chapter 24 when he talks about his second coming. He says it will be like the days of Noah, and the days of Noah are the days of the Nephilim. So suddenly, all of these ideas were coming together. The reality of UFOs, the sons of God and their offsprings, the giants, and their modern revival, the hybrids, and the relationship between the sons of God and the nations. Because, the term fallen angels is a term of Christian culture. It doesn't actually exist in the Bible. So in the Bible, they were called the sons of God, or the gods of the nations.
Right.
This is the term given to them.
Now,
And so,
wait, before you, I don't want to cut you. I love the way you're going, but I need you to kind of, for people that don't know, what are Nephilim? And two, how is it possible for the sons of God, i.e. angels, or like you said, fallen angels, able to mate with humankind? If you could just explain that and then go back to where your train of thought was.
okay, so basically, when you look at the account of history handed down by all nations, the Chinese, the Indians, the Persians, the Greeks, the Romans, the Mesopotamians, the Egyptians, all of our collective ancestors spoke of an age where the gods and the demigods, that's the term used most often in English, actually, that ruled the earth. There was religions dedicated to them. There were statues, drawings. If you, for instance, Google the Code of Hammurabi, you see that Hammurabi, the king of Babylon, is receiving a scroll of law from his god Shams, who's called Apollo by the Greeks, the sun god. You see this, I went to Persepolis, the ancient capital of the Persian Empire, and we're walking among the ruins. And my dad was an architect, and he said, I don't know how they erected these pillars. These pillars would be hard to erect even today. And there was a guy there walking among the ruins. He was obviously a villager. He came from one of the villages. And it was a day off, and he brought his family on a picnic and to see this stuff. And I turned around to him jokingly, and I said, "Sir, how do you think this stuff was built?" And he kind of, straightened himself and cleared his throat, like suddenly he was going to say something important. And he said, "Well, according to the ancient cuneiform tablets, they were champions living among them, and these champions were giants, and they helped them build it." And I was like, wow. So first of all, there's this account of our collective ancestors that talk about this, and then the Bible refers to it. It's starting in the book of Genesis, in chapter 6, verse 4, where it is the first mention of them. And it says that the sons of God cohabited with the daughters of men and created these offsprings. And in the Hebrew, nephal is the root word. So nephilim is the plural, because that's how you make the plural in Hebrew. You add im, the way that in English you add s. And Nephilim comes from the root word nephal, which means something that has fallen from heaven, the fallen ones. It's kind of saying that it's something heavenly and something of earth, because Adam means clay, right? Something from heaven and something from earth kind of mixed together. And that's what the word captures. And in the 4th century of the Christian era, a man by the name of Jerome, Saint Jerome, he decided that he was going to translate the Bible from the Hebrew and Greek into the Latin spoken by everyday Romans, the Vulgate. And he translated the word Nephilim as gigantus. And that's how we get the term giants. And that's how it entered into the English language as giants, this term. And so these were the hybrid offsprings of the sons of God and daughters of men. And this is also how the other cultures recorded them, like, let's say, the Greeks, that they were the children of heaven and earth, of sky and of earth, of the god of sky and the god that represented earth, like Gaia, that these were their offsprings. It was a way of kind of capturing this idea that something heavenly and something from earth had mixed together. And when we were reading the New Testament and looking for clues everywhere in the Bible that talked about this, we noticed that the book of Jude talked about it. And so the book of Jude quoted Enoch, the seventh from Adam, and I thought, well, I'm going to look into that, and I found there was a book called the Book of Enoch. I couldn't buy it anywhere, so I actually found it in a store that sold New Age books. It was called Seekers in Toronto here. I went there and I was like, "Do you have a Book of Enoch?" He was like, "Yeah, I have one," and he gave me one. Eventually, I was able to go to another bookstore called Chapters, and they looked into their computer system and ordered one for me. That was a better translation. It took 3 weeks for it to arrive, but it wasn't. These things were, no one was reading these things, so it was kind of hard to find. And so the Book of Enoch gave a much more detailed explanation of what had occurred before the flood. And since the New Testament quoted the Book of Enoch, it gave it a lot of weight for us. And so it talked about the name of the leaders, how many they were, what they did, and the kinds of knowledges they gave the human world. And that's when we realized that knowledge was being handed down, and that this had continued into the world till today, where there was alternative religions that are handed down, and codes of worship, sciences, and even today the massive ramp up in industry, from the Industrial Revolution to the digital era, to the digitizing of objects, which is going to happen with the coming of the 5G network next year, and the digitizing of cars, and of course ultimately the digitizing of humans, where humans will have implants in their brain that will allow them to connect to AI. Like Elon Musk is already talking about his company Neuralink that he's very proud of. And so this was all we realized, wow, that Satan was preparing the world to do battle with the second coming of the Lord, especially once we realized that these chariots were associated not only with the sons of God that were fallen, but also with the ones that stood. This was kind of a different perspective that we had from L.A. Marzulli, who was focusing on kind of the sons of God and the daughters of men before the flood, and them happening after the flood today, and kind of connecting to, for us, since we had understood that this term Elohim applied to all of these beings, the gods they were called, and of course, we as Christians, a better word for them is angels, and some had fallen, some were standing, but they both used chariots. Especially Chuck Missler, he was very it was difficult for him to accept the idea that the angels of God also used these chariots. For us, that wasn't the case. They all used it, and the Bible makes that clear. Actually, even in Isaiah chapter 66, I think it's around verse 15 or 16, it says that God will come with His chariots, and of course Elijah was taken up with chariots as well. And so we noticed that no, this was part of the makeup of the angelic world as a whole. And so that's what made the war of the end times possible, that this technology was kind of taking us there. And to come back to your second question, which is how could they procreate with us? Adam was the son of God. He was made in the image of God. And these are called the sons of God. We have kind of forgotten the fact that we are of the world of God and angels. We humans are of the world of God and angels. We were made in the image of God. The reason that these beings are connected to us, the reason they have rule over the nations, the reason God chooses let's say Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, and eventually the line of King David, and enters that line himself. God becomes a man and reigns as such among us, is because we are of the world of these things. So it sounds crazy when you think, they're connecting to us in this way. How could that possibly be? Because we're coming from kind of this traumatized perspective over the centuries, where we've been pushed down and down and down, to the point where we think, how could this be possible? it would be kind of like me saying to you, the English sent spies into the camp of the French, and they took wives for themselves. Well, the English and the French are kind of both humans, so that's possible. Once you understand that humans lived hundreds of years before the flood, and that God Himself has become one of us, and that we are eventually going to rule over the angels, as servants of God, of course, not as not as the lords of the world, but still, once you understand that we are of that world. Like Paul says that all of creation moans and groans in expectation of the revelation of the children of God, on this planet. Once you understand that, first of all, it makes the gap a little less wide. Now, the second problem is the physical nature of angels, and so that's why one of the chapters in the documentary is the physical. Is called the physical nature of God and angels. It's something in the Bible itself. The angels are presented in a physical form. We see that God walks in the Garden of Eden. We see that God and His angels share a meal with Abraham in Genesis chapter 18, the plains of Mamre. We see that the angels of God slay the Assyrians. Every time they manifest, in the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, people want to have sex with angels because they're used to it. That's why they do that. That's why they want to do that. What was happening in Sodom and Gomorrah, we are told in the New Testament that it will be like the days of Noah and the days of Lot. Actually, that's what it says in the New Testament. We don't often talk about the fact that it also says the days of Lot.
Right.
But the days of Lot were the days of Sodom and Gomorrah, and this phenomenon had taken root again after the flood in those cities, and that's why these men wanted to have sexual relations with these angels, because they were actually used to it. And so there's another physical nature, and when we kind of come into the New Testament, we see that the Lord was resurrected, and then He made a point of His physical resurrection. He said, "Come and touch me, I'm not a ghost. I have flesh and blood." He talked about His bones. He has flesh and bones, and He said, "Come and touch my wounds." And then He said, "Do you have any food?" To really show that He was truly physically resurrected from the dead. And the angel that rolled over the tomb of Christ, He sat on it. So what happened early on in Christian thinking is that the Gnostics influenced Christian thinking. And in the Gnostics, as Christianity spread from Israel into the Roman world, the Gnostics believed that the highest form of spirituality was non-physical, even though the Hebrew Bible had established the physical resurrection of the Son of God. But the Gnostics believed that the highest form of spirituality was non-physical, and therefore, there was even a God greater than the Hebrew God. There was a non-physical God. And gradually that perspective kind of entered church thinking. It wasn't the only perspective, but it had become one of the main perspectives of assigning, this supremely non-physical kind of, the physical is bad, so to speak, even though God blessed the creation of the physical world in the days of creation. So the moving forward into Christian history, the second, catalyst came with Saint Augustine, who was a very influential Christian writer for Western Christianity, and he had a teacher, Origen, or Oregon, I don't know how people pronounce it. He lived in Caesarea Marinera in Israel, and Augustine studied with him, and Origen really believed very much in this non-physical nature of angels and God. That really was a very important thing to him, and he kind of taught that to Augustine, and Augustine ran with it in his teachings and his writings, and it really shaped the thinking of Western Christianity further away from the physical nature of God and angels established in Scripture. Then we came to the Middle Ages. In the Middle Ages in Europe, a group of people said, you know what, we should actually study the physical world as the creation of God and learn from it. And these guys were interested in the sciences, and they were eventually going to create what was called the universities, starting in Italy, in Bologna, where the first university was created. So other Christians rebelled against this notion, and they said, no, why would we study the physical creation of God? It doesn't really matter. We should focus on the soul. As Christians, our entire focus should be, the study of the soul, our walk with God. This is what really matters to us. And they kind of secluded themselves. So Christians divided into two camps. So those who wanted to study the creation, and they eventually created the universities, and those who went into the study of the soul, and they entered the monasteries. And so these guys said, you know what? Actually, what is physical is profane, meaning it's very ordinary. That's what profane means, ordinary. And that which is spiritual is non-physical, and that's what we should really focus on. So they kind of went deeper into the idea that started with the Gnostics, with Origen. They now added one more, deviation into the importance of non-physical. And that kind of became part of Christianity in the Middle Ages, and it kept fueling this non-physical nature of God and angels and its importance in Western Christian thought. And then the New World was discovered, the colonies were established, and the Protestants, the Protestant Reformation, the Catholic Church, the Catholics that rebelled against their own clergy and protested their own church. They gradually had become a different faction, and they had come into the New World, and that had led to the idea of separating the church from the state. For all kinds of reasons that the Protestants had, going back to Constantine, and they felt that the introduction of the Roman Emperor into the body of Christ had brought in a lot of pagan and worldly ideas into the church, and the church had to separate from the state. And this kind of gave birth to the republics, starting with the American Republic and the French Republic. And so people were looking for new ways of understanding life, since the church was losing its power, so to speak, over the culture. And this gave room for new thinkers. And one of these thinkers was the British thinker, David Hume. And David Hume promoted the idea that you really can only believe in what you can see with your eyes, the material world. We don't know anything other than that. We only know what you can see. So the Christians then, rebelled against this idea, because they were like, no, you don't understand. There's a spiritual world out there. You may not be able to see it, but we can. And that is, we disagree with you, David Hume. And this position that the church felt it needed to take against the rise of materialism pushed the Western church yet one more step deeper into this idea of, the spirits. So the angels are spirits, God is a spirit, there's a spiritual world, and then the physical world is just something that's just basically a useless piece of junk that we're all living in, and our bodies are just useless. We should focus on the soul, and eventually we're all going to ascend, and Jesus is a spirit, and he's living the world of spirits, and we're all going to ascend into the heavenly Jerusalem, and we're going to be spirits with him. And that became more and more so kind of what started with the Gnostics kind of became more and more. So now we come to the second half of the 20th century, and really with the end times, the return of Israel to the land signals that the prophecies of the Bible can be taken literally, and that we may be, heading towards the second coming, and these ideas suddenly dawn on the church. And then we get the UFO phenomenon, and we start looking into it, and God suddenly unveils for us, the concept of the sons of God and their offsprings, and these, vehicles and these chariots, and suddenly all of this enters into a deep conflict with the way that Western Christianity had understood these things gradually over the past 2,000 years, where everything is very much spiritualized to the point where the idea that angels may be physical beings who have sexual relations with humans, it just seems like, no, that just doesn't fit in the way in the West we've come to understand these things and passed it down from one generation to another. Once I started to kind of scratch a little bit below the surface, I realized actually that people hadn't really thought too deeply about these things that were in the Bible. They had simply kind of agreed culturally how to see these things and had moved on. The focus of the church was on understanding salvation and Christian living and things like that. There were people's opinions were not necessarily to be very much respected about these things because these things were not the object of study. And so this kind of creates a confusion because on one hand we have this, highly spiritualized view. I'm not saying that there isn't a spiritual world, but I'm saying that we don't really know the makeup of it. For instance, the word Shamaim, which means heavens, which has been translated into Greek as Uranus. Again, in English, we call it heavens. Well, actually, the word in the Bible refers to anything that's 3 inches off the ground, all the way into outer space, and all the way into wherever God and his angels exist at the heart of creation. All of that is called the heavens. For instance, when in the Bible it says the birds, fly in the sky, where actually in the Bible it uses the word Shemaim. It uses the same word that it uses to say that God is in heaven. It's just the translator says, okay, well, the birds fly. Oh, in English we call that sky. So the translator decides to translate that for us into sky. Now, when it says that the sun and the moon are outside, over there, it uses the same word in the Bible, Shemaim. The translator has to struggle with that. How am I going to translate that word now? Well, we might now, modern translations might say universe, because now we have a word for created, universe. So, the sun and the moon, they're in the universe. Then it says, that God is in the Shemaim. The translator's like, okay, well, how am I going to translate that? It's not the sky, it's not the universe. Oh, we'll call that the heavens. So, but actually in the Bible, the word heavens means anything that's 3 inches off the ground all the way into outer space, all the way into where the sun and the moon is and the stars are, and all the way into the heavens of the heavens, which is mentioned, in the Bible as a concept where God is. So all of these things suddenly was like, wait a second, so actually the word heavens can actually mean the universe. So when it says the angels, come from the heavens, it could mean, they're coming, from this black thing we're seeing, but exactly what is this thing? We don't really know what it is. Do angels get in these chariots and then they accelerate at such a high speed that they turn from matter into energy and then they enter into an energetic realm? Perhaps. I don't know yet. Does a gateway open and they disappear and they go into another realm and are they just beings of energy in that realm? I don't know. I mean, so the church started to kind of think, okay, well, the angels are actually, these spirits, and they take physical form for a moment to interact with us. Well, that's not in the Bible. It doesn't say that in the Bible. It just presents them as physical, end of story. Whether that's the form they always have, or that's the form that they take to meet with us, I don't know. I mean, it says, let us make man in our image. There's a plurality there, Elohim. The church has understood that to be the Trinity, but once we understood that word Elohim actually, didn't just mean God, but it also meant these other beings that we call the angels. That term is used for them as well. For instance, in the passage that it says man is made a little lower than the angels, where actually in the Hebrew it says man is made a little lower than Elohim. So there the word Elohim is translated angels. But in the book of Genesis where it says let us make man in our image, the word Elohim is also used there. and it's not translated as angels. Well, the story of Adam is very, very interesting because it says, let us, there it's a singularity. Adam is created in the image of the Lord God, Adonai Elohim, the one who we realize is the leader of all of these angels. Adam is created in his image. But the story begins with suggesting that perhaps God and his angels were here, and beings were created even in the image of these angels, and then Adam was created in the image of the Lord God, and he was placed in a garden, secluded. He wasn't at first told to go and multiply and fill the earth. So there was suddenly this idea that, wait a second, the world of angels may contain a physical element as well, because God himself has manifested physically, and the physical world is blessed, and it could be the setting of the Bible. There could be more, and we know there are beings of spirit because we see that in the Bible, and we see in the Book of Kings where God addresses this group of angels, and he asks their opinion, what should I do? And then there's a spirit that appears before God and says, I'll be a lying spirit in the mouths of the prophets, and God says, go and do that. So
can I interrupt real quick? I just want, for the people that don't really know that the word angel is just messenger, and so there are there are different types, like the seraphim and the cherubim, and if you go into angelology, you'll see a lot of these things, but most people are not going to study angelology, so I just want to clarify that for the audience. Go ahead.
Yeah, the word angel means messenger in Greek, angelus, and it comes from the Hebrew malak. In the New Testament, it's become kind of like an umbrella word that encompasses all of these beings you mentioned. But you're right; they have different functions, they have different forms. Some may be spirit, some may be physical, and the main point I'm trying to make is that in the Bible proper, the physical world is not looked down upon the way that church history started to look down on the physical world. And Christians really started to hyper-focus their attention into this other realm that existed very predominantly in their thinking, which is called the spiritual world. Yet the world as we know it, the earth itself, and the universe as we know it, these are magnificent things. They're not some small little tiny thing that you can kind of wipe your nose with and throw in the garbage can. This is the mighty creation of God, time and space. And the host of the heavens could very much mean the host of, the universe and that which is beyond, because the word heavens does actually mean the universe in the Bible, what we call the universe. It could be also something that's beyond it, but it encompasses the universe. And the earth, of course, well, we know what the earth is. It's the thing we stand on. So this whole idea that the angels could procreate with man because they may be physical, and because we are called the sons of God, and they are called the sons of God, therefore there's a kinship. We have a common source, God himself. And God manifests himself as a physical being. So, of course, I would never put God in a box, right? So when God can be anything he wants. He has no form. He's outside of time and space. He's a spirit. He is in time and space. He takes a physical form. He's all of these things and more. I don't know what else God. We only know how God introduces himself in Scripture, but I wouldn't put God in a box. So when people say, "Oh, God couldn't do this," or "God wouldn't do this," I'm like, well, okay, you know what? You can discuss that with God when you see him. You can wave your finger at him and tell him that he can't get in one of his chariots if he wants to. You can tell him that he can't sit on the back of a donkey, or he can't be on a fisherman's boat, or he can't be at the end of Roman whips. You can tell him all of those things, that God is too great for such statements, or you can tell him that God wouldn't. You can put conditions on what God can or can't do. I don't dare to do that. So if God wants to enter the physical world and create things in his image, and have these beings interact with each other, he can. It's as simple as that. I'm not going to say that God can. And if these guys have to use vehicles to move around as we do, because we are also the children of heaven, then so be it. If God wants to now come in the midst of his creation and interact with it for a moment in time, and be among his angels and be among his men and be on fishermen's boats and be on these heavenly vehicles, he can. So suddenly the whole world of men and angels became a lot more connected, and the veil was removed. And part of this veil is the hyper spiritualization that has been handed down in Western Christian thought, that has to kind of be removed. The same way that when we think of angels, often we think of the paintings that the painters of the Renaissance have left for us, and we think, oh wow, angels, and that's what we're thinking about. We're not actually seeing in our mind, in our consciousness, the passages in the scriptural text that refer to angels, that reference angels. We don't know those passages in the back of our minds to summon them to the forefront of our thinking when we think of angels. We think of what we have inherited through culture, whether it's paintings or movies. That's how we think of angels. Well, in the biblical account of angels, they're very different. Like, look at the passage of Ezekiel, and these angels that have these wings that they put up, but those wings, they're not like bird-like wings. They're not like flapping them. I mean, I don't like to use the word mechanical because I don't like to superimpose anything of 20th century technology on the world of God and angels. I see that there are vehicles involved, but I don't know anything of the nature of these vehicles. And so I don't want to, take a leap and make them into like the Starship Enterprise. But I don't want to dismiss them as nothing or spiritualize them to the point where it's meaningless. I don't want to go to either extreme. But when I look into the scroll of Ezekiel, the first chapter of it, and I look at these beings that put their wings up and when they move, and they place their wings down when they stand, and the noise that he describes like rushing water, it sounds like, if you ever listen to a jet engine, the turbine moving as the plane is warming up, it sounds like rushing waters. I'm not saying, again, this is what it was, because I don't want to impose 20th century technology, but at the same time we have to understand that the reason we are making these vehicles and we are flying in the heavens and we're sending rocket ships up into the sky and we're flying aeroplanes, and is because we are the children of God, and we too have inherited the knowledge of such things that already is known by his angels. And so the angels suddenly appeared as beings that are more knowledgeable about the laws of creation, the very laws that we are learning about, because they're older and they're wiser in that sense. Not so much as magical beings that, are these spiritual ghosts that wiggle their noses and appear among us, and they snap their fingers and they do magic. So that kind of a church inherited perspective began to fall off our eyes as we stared more and more into scripture, as we looked at history, as we looked at the facts of the modern world and meditated on all of these things. And it suddenly changed our perspective of, I think it revealed to us, the scriptural perspective. And so once these passages became very real through the reality of UFOs, and I think even the hybrids of today made the Nephilim of the past very real, suddenly they became like keys that opened doors in the Bible. And then the Bible in turn gave us the understanding of what was going on and who these beings were and how they fit in history, how they fit in the past, what was their connections with the nations, what was their past deeds, and how did all of this reach into the modern day UFO phenomenon, and what is the purpose of this phenomenon, and why are the fallen angels presenting themselves as aliens, when they introduced themselves as gods to our ancestors? They are not gods and they are not aliens. The Bible, gave us the insight as to who they were and how this may be leading to a deception that ties into the second coming. So as the research into the UFO phenomenon unlocked many passages in the Bible in turn shed light as to how we were to understand all of this. And when these two things clicked together, then the documentary formed in my mind. And that's how I started to film people. So I met Chuck Missler several times. We had dinner with him in a small private Bible study he led. Interviewed him. Went to Philadelphia. Interviewed Dr. David Jacobs. I think in 2000 I think that was 4, and eventually, we put UFOs, Angels, and Gods out in 2006 on Google Video, which was seen as the website that was going to dominate. Audiovisual had just started because the internet was too weak. You could only really send pictures at that point, and podcasts, audio podcasts, that was going to be the big thing, because everyone was like, yeah, the internet is too weak for video, but audio can do that. So everyone was focusing on audio podcasts. But then Google created this thing called Google Video, where it was like, yeah, actually, you know what, the internet is becoming stronger and you can put up videos. And then three young boys created another website called YouTube, and we thought, well, why would we upload it on YouTube? Because who are these three little, these three gentlemen? They're not going to be able to compete with Google. It wasn't a big corporation as it is today. It was already a big enough corporation that you knew it was here to stay. And so we went with that, and then it just went viral. It started with 5,000 views a day, which really for now it's not a lot. But in 2006, when no one was watching anything on the internet, it was audiovisual, that was a lot. And just 5,000 every day, 10,000, it just went viral. And before I knew it, there was 270,000 views. It became one of the most popular things on all of Google Video. When you went on Google Video, there were 6 things on the front page that were the most popular, and this was one of them. And then I started to get emails from all around the world. I mean, from the Orient to the Middle East to Europe to America. People started to contact me to visit me, and so I realized, wow, we really maybe had received some understanding of things from the Lord, and the Lord was blessing this. And then over the years that followed, I saw that other thinkers and researchers in the Christian world began to come up with the same understanding independently. And eventually there was a gentleman, his name was Dr. Michael Heiser. He finally was really the guy who finally started to talk about the gods. Until now it was all about the Nephilim and the sons of God, but the understanding of the gods of the nations, we got a lot of slack for that. But I'm happy now that Dr. Heiser started talking about it, and there's another gentleman, his name is Derek Gilbert. He started talking about it, and I was like, okay, finally, that's coming online. So the topics that we tackled, such as essentially the chariots that were in the Bible, the sons of God, their offspring, the Nephilim or the giants. These topics and the gods of the nations, which is the same as sons of God, these topics started to be talked about and became more and more something that the mainstream of Christian thought got interested in. And so then I knew that these things were really coming from God to this generation, and that I could confidently, go ahead, because I'm afraid of God. I don't want to just go out and say anything to people.
Right.
I'm a careful person. I like to meditate on things, pray about it, think about it, research it thoroughly, talk to other people about it. And so I was kind of encouraged to see that this was really something that people far more learned than me, far more smarter than me, were also talking about. And I knew, okay, this was from the Lord. And so in the past few years, I've really focused again on Thinking and Productions. That's where people can see the documentary if they want, thinkingandproductions.com. And I'm now writing, several. I'm writing a novel, and there's several other books that I'm writing about. There's new research coming. The hybrids. When I spoke with Dr. Jacobs in the early 2000s. The story was about the fact that hybrids were being created through alien abductions. I mean, it's a very strange thing. You got to watch the documentary to see what I mean.
Yeah.
But now it's about the fact that hybrids are living among us. And so I went recently and interviewed him again for a new documentary that I'm putting together.
Mm-hmm.
So this is kind of my story, I guess, and the story of our research. That's it.
Yeah, I want to drop a few nuggets on the audience and give you like a benchmark. I would like to bring you back to talk about another subject, but before I tell you what that subject is, I want to tell people that, also in the Book of Revelation, when it's talking about the angel of the churches, those are the pastors. And also, as far as the story of the Nephilim and all this, it disappeared for a long time, and it's resurgent now. And so it's not a new teaching. The Jews, they knew all about this stuff, and they wrote about it, and of course it was handed down and on their tongue and everything. So and then like Ali has been explaining this whole time, throughout different cultures, there's a story of Noah and all, I think like 2,000 cultures or something like that, and of all these gods you hear about, and these deities, I guess you call them, fallen angels and stuff like that. These cultures gathered and worship things like Baal, which is also Zeus, which is also Thor, and other characters that you might know that are in the superhero films and everything like that. But the last thing I want to mention here is in Daniel, it says they will mingle themselves with the seed of men. We clearly see there that these are not men, these are not humans mingling themselves with our seed. So that's another nugget for you to go and research for yourself. And on that point, I would say, Ali, if you would ever want to come back on this program, you're invited, and we could talk about this mingling of the seeds.
Yes, absolutely, Chris. Anytime, I'll be glad to come back, and we can talk about Daniel chapter 2, I think it's verse 43, 44 that you're quoting, and how that really is one of the key verses that connects the Nephilim of old to the hybrid phenomenon of today and the fulfillment of prophecy. And I could share my research into the creation, into this mingling of seeds that's happening today among us. It's very strange, but it's actually very well documented, very real.
Yeah.
And it's I think good for people to know about these things. One thing about these stories, what does it all mean at the end of the day to us? All of this strange stuff. For me, it means, first of all, that the Bible's account of history is real. That things that have been classified as myth are actually history. And that means that there's that God's love for us collectively, for us individually, is also real. That He's reaching out into the world and calling us to Himself because we were of Him. And we were, involved in the story. There was deception, there was ruse, there was actions and consequences. This is our true history, the biblical story of Eden and all that has happened since. And we have a chance to respond to God's love, to experience it, to welcome it, to be healed by it, and to have a place in His kingdom and in this idea of eternal life, that this is all true and that the prophecies of the Bible add up. So it's not about, the weird and the strange for me, or about, being afraid and being scared of things like this.
Right.
It's about kind of the larger conclusion, which is, wow, this is all true then. The Bible is actually a true account of history. And that we are headed into a new chapter of history that's going to be a better chapter, and we individually can welcome God in our lives here and now, as well as be part of what's coming with Him into ages and ages. So it's very encouraging, very hope-filled to realize that, wow, this is all true. The promises of God and the sovereignty of God and the healing and love that comes from God. He hears our prayers. All of these things is true. That's really kind of what's at the end of the day important to me and important for everyday life,
Right, exactly. And if you're out there and you're not a Christian, that, this wraps it up, that God is on the throne. We are born in sin, and God had a plan of redemption that came down through the ages through his son Jesus Christ, and Christ declared himself as God, and in bodily form he sacrificed himself on the cross for all humanity, not just still special individuals, all humanity. Then he died, resurrected on the third day, and the foundation of Christianity. He resurrected. God, the God-man, died, resurrected, and now you have a free gift called salvation. You have to realize that you are a sinner and you've broken God's law, starting with, bowing down to other gods, lying, stealing, taking other people's possessions. The Ten Commandments is clear, and that exposes our sin. And now that you know, and if the Holy Spirit is nudging your heart to turn to him, repent, make a U-turn, change of mind, then please do so, because that's what this is all about. Don't let them burn, and the gospel reaching out to humanity. We don't want you to burn. Ali, thank you so much for joining us.
You're welcome.
And we hope to have you back soon. And everybody out there, if you're a Christian, remember, don't let them burn.
I want you to think of a time when you had control over your mind. Now think of a time when you let anything into your subconscious. Have we been led to a critical junction by unseen forces? What does this mean for the future of mankind? What have you been trained to believe about UFOs and aliens? Have you been deceived? Are you waiting for something to show up? In this groundbreaking documentary film, the veil will be lifted, your eyes will be open, as the truth is exposed like never before. We are not alone, but they are not what you think. Disclosure is near, so what will be the event? The one event that will fool the global population in the last days? Find out soon as we uncover the alien deception. Entertainment Frontlines.
If you like our videos, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and the notification bell to get all our frequent updates.